didn't pull that up. Oh, my script. I forgot. Usually I have it ready to go, so I don't have to waste our time getting it. Introductory remarks. Okay, let me make sure that
Isn't there an
folks
Zoom
online
invite?
can hear us. Okay, sweet, looks like we're good. Live streaming on YouTube. Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Willow. I'm the City of Eugene staff representative for this meeting, and before we convene, I have a few reminders. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that tonight's meeting is held on Kalapuli-Ohihi, the traditional indigenous homelands of the Kalapuli people, who continue to make contributions in the communities here and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. The purpose of the ATC is to advise the City of Eugene staff and community organizations and partners on the implementation of Eugene's pedestrian and bicycle strategic plan, to represent community and constituent interests in transportation planning decisions, and to provide feedback to staff on projects related to walking and biking. Eugene City staff will consider recommendations from the ATC along with input from other members of the public during decision-making processes. Please keep in mind that this meeting is being both recorded and live streamed to YouTube, meaning it can be viewed on the City of Eugene Transportation Planning YouTube channel. All verbal and written commentary will be held in the public record. We'll begin with a 15-minute public comment period. This is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the ATC on transportation-related issues. Each person has 3 minutes to speak, and when it is your time, make sure to give your name, city of residence, and if you live in Eugene, your neighborhood or ward. So we'll start with those of us online, which it does not appear that we have anyone other than Peter, who's online, but he's on the ATC, so he's not going to come. No attendees today. So we can go to those of us who are here in person. I'll grab the list. Okay, we can start with you.
So I have a question. I'm glad you're here. This is 29th and Willamette. Right. So I nearly got murdered by someone here going this way across the as I went this way.
What's
We're going
This is
from west
eastbound.
to east down 29th.
Okay,
This is Willamette down here.
okay.
And so we go along this side and then we swing in. At the same time, this is a turn lane.
Yeah.
These people are slightly swinging right. And this person, if they don't go this way, will swing this way across us as we go. And, I looked up the codes and it all says, of course, if we are supposed to be recognized as a lane. And we're designated as a lane, so even if I was crushed, it would be their liability. For crushing me in bike lane, and I really wondered if anyone had any thoughts about, before and on here and on Pearl as well, I often sit. But it can get backed up, because I'll wait to see, that I can cross, so that someone won't be doing what happened to me yesterday. And so, I don't know if people have thoughts about this. The legality of this doesn't help when you've got a giant thing turning into you. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about how to deal into this or Pearl, where we got people turning into us on Pearl. It can be people, oh my God, I'm in the turn lane and you're already here between them and this, and they're going, I want to go this way, and So, but this is a very obvious one where people are definitely turning. There's a lot of turning happening. And so I don't know if people have thoughts about the best way to handle this intersection in the bicyclist or even. I don't know that anything more can be done. We've got the, the page and everything else, but that's my thought for today.
It's interesting you bring it up because we're just talking to somebody else about 29th and Willamette. And Catherine was talking to a community member about 29th and Willamette. I actually have a draft email in my mailbox to send to the ATC about this intersection that Catherine wanted to ask you all about. So it's interesting that you have.
Well, I was lucky she had her windows open on a big old SUV. So I told her she was trying to murder me. Apparently, well, I've decided I'm screaming.
Yeah.
But she's coming next to me and I could tell her, I scream, are you trying to murder me? And so it jerked and slowed. That was the good part. And then, she followed up alongside of me there and I continued to tell her what she was doing to me. But anyway, I'm just trying to think, I don't know that there is a real, anything we can do for,
This is 29.
I appreciate you bringing it up as well. I walk by that 4 times a day with my child on
Oh,
the
right.
Camas Ridge.
right,
And I see numerous children riding
they're riding on this?
eastbound, yes.
Oh, boy.
On the way to school in the mornings as well. And that whole intersection, bike and pedestrian, is just waiting for someone to be murdered.
Oh, I know, yeah.
It is extremely problematic, and if we
Well, there's
could
a lot
analyze
of-
it. and get some
There's a
things-
lot of crunchy evidence
Yeah.
down here, so I assume as I go through the lot, that there's a lot of accidents between the cars themselves, and I don't know how many pedestrian or bike ones have happened.
It's
But
bad.
anyway, that's my,
I think at the very least, a sign, a traffic sign, as you lead up to it. That, big and bright saying,
again,
must yield to.
she came from behind me, I'm right there, so she's.
Where was she looking?
I was looking only at the car, I wasn't even looking at her, I'm going, oh my God, so,
It's frustrating.
You're
Is it
riding.
Considered best practice, Reed, to have that kind of a thing, or is there?
I was gonna say this was best practice like 15 years ago, I wanna say. And the reason that this looks, and well, arguably it still is, depending on what you're trying to do. Remember, 29, neither 29th nor Willamette are all ages and abilities, and so you want folks who are comfortable riding mixed traffic. And so you should know how to look over your shoulder and do a check and communicate if you're gonna do a lane change. And when I do this, I have had issues too with cars who like don't wanna wait for me. But generally, I will like assert my space and say, I'm going there now, and it generally works, but the genesis of this is that. The lane that you're trying to turn out of becomes a turn lane.
right,
And so if you were to remain curbside, the likelihood that you're gonna get hooked on a green light is much higher because you're both gonna start at the same time. Now, you could do a bike signal or something like that and clear the bikes out before you get there. That would require a no turn on red. And this intersection is already quite congested, and so that would be a difficult conversation with the traffic engineers to have. Back when we were doing the South Willamette Street revitalization project, I think is the title, we looked at a roundabout at 29th and Willamette. And there simply isn't room to do it,
right.
especially with that north west corner. That building comes up all the way to the sidewalk. It's completely in the way. And so we're not gonna take buildings down to do an intersection improvement. I think the signals could get smarter. I think, Willow, if Catherine's gonna come talk about this intersection, because each leg of this is a little different too, is the other part of it, which is
Yeah.
awesome.
Freaking.
We could probably take another look at this, and maybe this is something cheaper, like a striping project. That better resembles the movements that people are actually making, and maybe that becomes a right turn signal for cars too, right? So you could potentially keep bikes curbside and then make it like a separate signal phase, although then it becomes an enforcement issue and a compliance issue. But there's options and alternatives we could probably do. But a lot of our intersections do look like this and do require you to lead across traffic, and I think we've done a pretty good job of adding green colorant in all of those
I
areas.
think it helps a lot.
But I think folks could use a refresher on what green colorant means, because I don't think that we do.
I think PSA, that's what I was thinking, most people who are driving and looked at the book the last time when they took their test.
Yep.
So I don't know if the UDOT people or whoever could do a PSA saying, these are some of the new, bicycle striping things. This is what, these lines mean across here. This is what the green line means across here. This is a short one, maybe a PSA from the.
So there was a safe driver program or class actually today. Where it's taught by Shane, and I think Al Hongo taught this one this morning. Talking all about all the bicycle features that are on the road and how drivers are supposed to interact with them. And generally speaking, we've had those with fleet drivers. So garbage trucks, bus drivers, those sorts of folks, so that they know how to do it. And there's talk with the municipal court that folks who get traffic tickets might be able to go to a diversion class and get this type of training in lieu of paying a ticket. And we've had programs like that in the past. We just need some folks to be able to teach that and to be
There's
able to
money.
put that mechanism in place. And so we're talking about that too, and that could be implemented soon.
Oh, cool.
As a bicyclist, like on Pearl especially, I sometimes do this, I like stay in this lane and then merge.
Yeah,
Because it's different than crossing over traffic.
yeah.
So I don't know if you can, I don't know how you communicate, if you were to change it to do that, I wouldn't know how to. Show that, you can do that, but, I find it much safer, especially on Pearl.
The other tool in the toolbox would be like protected intersection where bikes sort of ride around the entire outside, kind of like you
Yeah.
would at a
That's right.
roundabout.
Like a.
But again, that requires a lot of space and you can
Yeah,
see,
really.
I think to do this project, when we did the transformation, all those corners look brand new. That's all right away. I think we had to buy, and I don't know if we can get more. Potentially we can, it's just money. That tends to be the thing.
Something that I've seen, that they designed in DC when I lived there was. There was a road like that where people were turning and the bike lane just continued. And then they had some like, plastic ballard kind
Yeah.
of things and sort of. Indicated where the car could then turn into the bike lane, which I also didn't feel like was very safe at the time, but.
That's called a mixing
There's
zone.
more only like a smaller section of where the car should enter.
And that's what you're seeing up on the northeast corner. That's a mixing zone. So that's a right turn lane / bike lane.
Mhm.
And so we have one of those up there and that's, Catherine started wanting to talk about this because we're getting complaints about that too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So yes, that's
I
a
don't
thing we
know.
could also do and we tried it here and people don't like that either.
Mhm.
We've also been hearing from folks who are wanting to turn left
Oh, you
from
have to get
Willamette
there.
onto 29.
Correct. Two lanes.
And
I-
it's two
And then
lanes,
turn.
yeah, so there's been,
I do that all the time, but
Me too.
I get over at the left-hand vehicle turn lane to do
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
it's just two whole, you get into that third lane, so it's like, it's a big move for
Right,
people.
right.
Why don't we just
I
quickly
always-
take
I always
some
get
of that
complaints.
parking lot? I'm not kidding. Why don't we take some of that parking lot and have the bike lane merge into the sidewalk there and just not even. Don't even see what I said. This is probably not legal either, but
All things are possible if we've got money and we've got willing owners who want to sell us property.
I mean, like, we could pretend that. Like, I mean, or not pretending, but we're talking about all the like, all the potentially unsafe things when the obvious one is to not have cars and bikes interacting at all in this.
Okay,
And when there's space to do it.
we have more people signed up.
Yeah, Noah is also signed up.
Thanks, Connie.
Thanks, Connie.
Sorry, Jacob, all the time.
I'm Noah Purnell, I live in Ward One. Many of you have probably heard of some of the interesting things happening in a city that I'm gonna mispronounce, Hoboken, New Jersey. They've had Vision Zero for quite a while. As a policy goal. And my understanding is they've had one pedestrian death in the last 6 or 7 years. I haven't looked it up recently. They're a very different city than Eugene. I'm not saying that we can replicate what they've done in the same ways. But one of the things that they brag about, they think is the most significant, is their daylighting intersections policy.
What's that?
No parking within 20 feet of a crosswalk. Essentially making it so that drivers can see what's going on the corner. Pedestrians can see what's going on the street. And I was thinking, gosh, that would be nice in Eugene. And looking around and saying, oh, it's actually already implemented here and there. And then, and definitely not in other places. And then I was having a discussion with someone who was approaching this from a homeowner being annoyed about homeless people situation. They had called parking enforcement on someone who was parked close to the corner. And parking enforcement had said, look, we can't enforce it because the yellow paint is eroded away. But then so I thought, well, let's look it up. Oregon State already has a 20-foot from the intersection daylighting law. It is ORS 811.555, section 17. And I know that the stuff that is not daylighted is not always legacy stuff. For instance, within the last 2 years, what used to be bike parking in front of the Kiva was switched to car parking that would estimate as 10 feet from the crosswalk. Maybe 15. I don't know. I have not had time to correlate undaylighted intersections with accidents, but it strikes me as a very affordable improvement that the city could do to adhere to Oregon state law and affordable and effective improvement in quality of life and safety. And something that would be politically feasible, I know the city a lot of times has been very willing to do the right thing when they can say, well, the state's making us do it. I don't know how to get the ball rolling on that, but I wanted to bring it to you.
Makes a lot of sense.
That's interesting.
So as I mentioned, functional classification in the ORS.
There's lots of exceptions.
Yeah, so we do tend to do it at signalized intersections. Most of those are arterial or collector streets. Where our standard, actually our local standard is 30 feet. But at a lot of uncontrolled intersections on local streets or stop controlled intersections, even one-way stop. The parking is much closer to the intersection. But it is yellow paint season. And so when you see those instances, call 682-4800 and say, let's get some yellow curb out here, or there's yellow curb that needs to be refreshed. Because they're out in their striping trucks right now and they're refreshing yellow curb, so.
So there is yellow curb, but there are also instances where the city is putting parking spaces in that zone.
And I would also, if you call 682-4800, I would say also, I don't think there should be parking in these locations. And they can go take a look at that too and add yellow curb. I don't think we've got staff to go out and audit the entire city, but on a complaint basis, it's absolutely, because it's bite-sized pieces. And that's probably how we're gonna eat the elephant, is we gotta be strategic about it.
Cool, thanks, Reed. You're always so handy to have.
Yeah.
I'm like, sounds good, I'll look into something.
People.
Okay. Did you sneak in a little bit late?
That's not in, but.
Okay, do you have any comment that you want to give?
No.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, sounds like we're done with public comment.
Okay, well, thank you. Food for thought. Okay, we will move into the rest of the meeting. I would like to remind you, if you want to speak, if you would turn your little name tag this way, it makes it a little easier for me to keep track of who's up next. So we have the minutes of the summary notes of the May 2024 meeting. Does anybody have any corrections or, yeah, Alex?
Yeah, I've noticed this last year or the year at some point earlier, and I don't think it ever got corrected, but the minutes have not noted who is in attendance from the ATC. And I believe that is in violation of public meeting laws. I'm not 100% sure of that, but at the very least, it's helpful for our own records and historically, both in the long term, understanding the ATC, but also for our own use to know who was here for what meeting. So I'd like to see that added if it's possible from any of the previous meetings, but including the May meeting. If not, then going forward.
I do keep attendance. I have an Excel spreadsheet, so it should be relatively easy for me to just put it on there. This meeting is not technically required to be a public meeting. We have it as a public meeting out of like a goodwill, but it's not required to be a public meeting, so we're not bound by those rules. But if we think it would be helpful, we can put the attendance if folks feel like that they would like that.
Yeah.
Jared, did you have something?
Yeah, I wasn't at the last meeting. But I noticed in the minutes, there was discussion of the High Street. Bikeway and trash cans in the bikeway, and I've only been on the bikeway twice, but both times between 18th and 19th, there's trash cans.
Nice.
So I just wanted to reinforce that, because I know we talked about it last time and you just mentioned you look into it and check on it, but it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, especially that's like the residential block. So that's where we've been seeing that.
But the students will be leaving soon, so maybe we'll stop putting trash in. Okay,
When I'm up there and I run into a trash can, I get up and I move it on top of curb.
yeah.
It usually stays there.
Shane's been leaving a little note on his business card and putting it on the
Is it
trash
before or after the trash is collected?
Oh, that's a good question.
They are, in case of the protected bike lanes, they are rear loading those, so a person gets out of the truck, grabs the bin and then runs with it. And so putting it top of curb is not gonna slow them down then.
But
Or at
they
least my
might
dad
be,
said that it would.
No,
they might be putting it back.
I'm
Oh,
asking
yeah.
who's putting it there. That's, it was a question.
And there's 3 different haulers and we've only ever heard from one, even though we've tried to talk to all of them, so it's kind of it's like moving frogs in a wheelbarrow. It's just-
I mean, trash comes really early when they
Okay,
come.
do we
to
have
my
any,
place.
will somebody move to approve the minutes? Sure.
Second,
Charlotte. Second by Josh. All in favor, raise your hand or phone or whatever. Okay. Okay, that brings us to Reed.
Well, yes, I'll come up here. Are you gonna advance slides for me or do I have a button or something?
What would you prefer? I can just slide you my computer and you can advance.
That might be best, because I'm gonna
That feels-
move through them pretty quickly, I think. I think we have 20 minutes and I assume folks probably have questions.
Yeah.
Has anybody looked at the Complete Streets guidelines online? Some folks have, great, awesome. So for folks who don't know who I am, I'm Reed Dunbar and I work with Willow in transportation planning and run public works engineering. We started working on an update to the Complete Streets. Was that yours?
I have a beanie, it's 70 degrees.
We started working on an update to the Complete Street Standard back in 2017. That's to update this document, which is from 1999. And so there was a lot of cool stuff in there. We had already talked about skinny streets. We were doing some traffic calming stuff. We talked about bike lanes and standard features on arterial and major collector streets, and so that helped build the network. So it had a lot of good stuff in it. We didn't want to completely throw it out, but there's been a lot of innovation that's happened over the past 25 years, and so it was time to update the standards. I'll go back to this slide because I think this is really important, especially for this audience. The other thing that is now going to be entrenched, because I'm here because this thing is moving toward adoption. And so if you've got any last minute questions or comments or see some errors, please let us know because we're trying to get the document ready to get in front of Planning Commission and City Council for adoption by the end of the year. But this one includes a modal hierarchy, and it says we need to take extra care when designing our streets for vulnerable users or people who are not surrounded by steel cages and airbags, right? So folks who are walking depend on the design of the sidewalk to keep them safe. And so they need to be a larger consideration than, say, folks who are driving, because they just need some space to operate a car. And so the mode is walking at the top, and then it's biking, and then it's transit, because every transit trip begins and ends with somebody who's walking or taking the bike, and then driving. So that's going to be formalized and adopted as part of this plan. The major limitation in the previous plan was really about, I'm sorry, I use plan and guide and standards interchangeably. Basically, there's a portion of street standards that get embedded in city code, but a lot of it is just guidance. And so I use them interchangeably because it just depends on what section we're talking about, but we intend to adopt the whole darn thing. And then the part that has to go into code is going to go through the code adoption process, where there will be formal public hearings and that sort of thing. And it's the stuff that we can hold developers to do. But so this is talking specific, do you have?
Yeah, I have a question
clarification?
related to that. How will we know which parts would go through the code adoption?
I don't even know.
Okay.
So we're still working that out. We're working with our city attorney's office to figure out like what has to go where. And this week I met with developers, I met with internal staff. This morning I met with the fire department. And everybody's got stuff that they want added. And so we're gonna update the document again, get that back over to the city attorney's office and figure out how to get basically consistency throughout all of our policies that we require folks to abide by. And so it's a big lift, and that's probably why it's going to take us until the end of the year to get this adopted. But we've been sitting with a document that has been in draft form since 2020, and we've been using the document. So we feel pretty good about it. I just think there's a few clarification things we have to figure out. The things that are primarily adopted are standards tables. And I'll have an example of here later on that shows like street widths, for example. That's something that we embed in code. As I mentioned, the big limitation here is functional class, and I mentioned it with parking too. We've got local streets, we've got collector streets, and we've got arterial streets. And that's what this plan focused on. And it says, based on the functional class, here's a couple things that you can do. And we said, well, we're going to need more classifications than that, given the different types of land uses that we have. So one of the things that this plan was trying to do was to provide for livability. There's 4 goals for designing complete streets. The first one is really about making sure that people can access their destinations, regardless of what travel mode that they choose. And this really guides transportation choice. If somebody wants to take the bus to the work or to the store and they feel like they can't get across the street, they're not going to take that trip. They're going to get in the car instead. And so that's really what this is about, is let's provide for livability to give people more transportation choices. The second is ensuring health and safety in the design and to encourage active transportation trips by ensuring that there's facilities there that feel comfortable and safe. Third is to accommodate all travel modes and to recognize that the needs of someone walking are very different than the needs of freight haulers, for example. And so we have different typologies for our streets that sort of forecast what we think the primary need is based on the land use context. And then lastly, to make sure that we can maintain the stuff that we're putting out there in the street, and that when we have the option of using green infrastructure, that we prioritize that. So how do we use these standards? As I mentioned, we now have 10 different typologies. Got some commercial, and this is driven by land use. And we talked to the land use planners too, and they're like, well, how do we know that the street that a proposal is on is going to match up with what the proposal is? And what we've said is, well, we start with land use, and then we try to make sure that we can accommodate whatever that land use is. And so there's going to be like a dense development that is going to rely on transit, because they're not going to add any parking. Then we would want to make sure that that street is transit capable, for example. And so we're really looking to follow land use context with the street design. So there's a number of different typologies here. I want to give an example of why we need to do this using commercial land uses. And specifically, I'm going to talk about commercial Main Street and then commercial suburban. So the top image is commercial Main Street, where there's very low setback between where the buildings are and where the cars are and where people are walking. The massing also tends to be a little bit greater. There's more emphasis on the pedestrian realm and on bicycling. Again, remember our hierarchy where we're focusing on people walking and biking. And the one on the bottom is like over by Valley River Center, where there's a lot of freight needs, there's a lot of big box out there, they're surrounded by surface parking lots. But in functional class, these are exactly the same. These are both minor arterial streets. And so we said, well, these are not the same at all. So how do we get into the nuance of these different places? And it has to follow the land use. So one of the ways that we do that is looking at sidewalks. This may be one of the tables that we embed into code because it gets specific about standards and widths. So in commercial Main Street, for example, here's an image of that. We would expect things like cafe seating to be there. We would expect, if that's retail, that folks would potentially have sidewalk sales and bring their stuff out onto the sidewalk. It's about providing a lively street environment. And again, we're starting on the outside of the street, starting with the pedestrian realm and then sort of moving toward the center line, because cars are sort of guests in an environment where we're focusing on pedestrians. So we've got standards that look at that, but at the same time, we also have those commercial suburban streets, and the use of things like sidewalks is a little bit different there, in that you're trying to get to different transit stations. And so we're not expecting the same level of accommodation in terms of cafe seating or anything with the width or the standards in those locations. And so it's designed a little differently. Although in this instance, you can see the concrete lane there is actually for transit. And so we're trying to use these standards. Here's another example of a table that is going to probably be in chapter 9. It talks about 11 foot for bus lanes or turn lanes, but our standard is now 10 feet overall for travel lanes. There are some exceptions to that. And then bike lanes start at 6 and then go up to like 10 feet, plus barriers or separators. One of the, I think, outliers to this is like an industrial street, where the primary purpose of the street is to move freight. In the adjacent land use context is warehouses, where yes, people work and some of those people might walk or bike there, but primarily it's designed for large freight vehicles and making sure that they have access to these warehouses. And so We try to accommodate all of those different land uses with street typologies that match. There's also some more descriptive information in the document about the sorts of things you can do to make intersections feel better. We want to do fewer slip lanes. In fact, we're going to be taking the one out at Highway 99 and Prairie Road as part of that project where we're adding sidewalks to the Maxwell Bridge. We're doing reduced curb radii and curb extensions to slow folks down as they go around corners. We're also looking at things like traffic circles and traffic calming devices to make neighborhoods feel a little bit better. We've got lots of different things on the menu that developers can look at and that our project engineers can look at when we're looking at street redesign or retrofits.
Reed, do you want questions at the end, or it looks like Lucy has a question?
Is it a clarification question on a slide?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was a couple of slides ago where you had the streets table. Maybe I missed it, but is there also a standard for sidewalk width?
Yes,
Was that back here? Oh, okay,
it's right here.
nice.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And in the sidewalk table too, we divided into a couple different places. There's a place where people walk. There's what we call the amenity zone, which is where like street trees live. And where we would put things like bike share.
Mhm.
And then there's like a frontage zone just immediately outside of the store, basically, or the front of the building.
Okay.
And those all differ a little bit. I think this audience might also want to know that we also have standards for shared use paths. This is the first time that we're actually considering modal separation between bikes and pets. We put a number in there right now. The threshold would be like 3,000 trips a day. At that point, we need to separate. And so this has some standards on when to do that. I think that's a pretty lofty number, so we might want to edit that over time. There's a sort of a coordination thing I've been talking with other city staff about, and we talk with our partners at LTD about street design. Fire was a big one today. Our streets do an awful lot of stuff. And so I don't know that there's a perfect way to do everything that we need to do, but we want to err on the side of mobility and safety. And so making sure that it's compliant for our most vulnerable users, using the ADA standards, as well as making sure that it's connected is sort of where we start. And then we're sort of looking at what can we add to it. All of this is online. If you go to the website and just click on that image, it'll bring up the overall document. Some folks have also noted that we've mapped out the city and where we think these different typologies might be for each street segment. This map is going to be updated and adopted as part of these street standards. And it's going to be flexible. So if there's a large development that's going to go somewhere, we plan on changing the street typology accordingly as need be. As I mentioned, we've started to use the standards. So when I talked about like those curb extensions and reducing curb radii, this is like 17th at Lincoln, where we've, bumped that out. We were doing a lot more bump outs when we redid South Willamette Street. Those are 10-foot travel lanes and 6-foot bike lanes. So that's using the new standards. We're also looking at different traffic calming devices. These are what's called speed cushions, which is supposed to help emergency services vehicles be able to travel faster through these because they're a little bit wider than most cars. The next steps, as I mentioned, is talking to everybody we can think of, and then getting this in front of the folks who are going to basically adopt or recommend or approve the document. We have to get it back in front of the city attorneys just to make sure that we're adopting the components that could be legally challenged in code. And so that's going to take a little time to get through, but we've already started that. But as I mentioned, the entire document is going to be adopted administratively, which is going to help us because it means that we can update it as need be and not have to go through city council to make updates. So hopefully this is a more dynamic document than what we had in 1999, and we can update it more frequently. And that is my contact information. If you have specific questions or comments, please let me know, and I will record all of those, and then we will sit down and pour over them as a group and see if we can get them in the document somehow. That's Complete Streets in a nutshell. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Reed. So with this being, shall I say, at least somewhat forward thinking, we are always gonna, I imagine, collectively as a group, we want to push that as far as possible. Have you identified any, what I might say, political real hot points where we might, as ATC, be able to help you with that or support you in any way?
I mean,
Where you're gonna get pushback and, we might start talking to our friends or that kind of thing.
I think we're pretty set on the standards that we have. As I mentioned, we've been using them with our pavement projects for the past 4 years. And so I feel like we've ironed out the widths. Now, there's gonna be folks from LTD who say they need to be wider. Fire also always wants wider. And what we're trying to do is figure out where the transit streets are specifically, and make sure that they have as much width as they need, but we're not gonna make every street transit capable. And that seems like a decent compromise. The conversation I had with fire today was also similar to that. It's like, well, where are your run routes? Because those used to be public information. They no longer are for security reasons, but they're like, I said, can we get access to those maps, please? So that we can make sure that we're not designing something that won't work for your apparatus, is the term that they use. But also what has been happening is when we have things like events. So when the Olympic trials on Agate Street closed down Agate Street, there's a fire station on Agate Street. The detour for them is on all traffic calm streets. And they said that's gonna cost them 4 minutes in response time to get anywhere.
Wow.
And that can be a lot if somebody's, in cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're also gonna have to start thinking about is secondary routes for run routes. So I've learned a lot over the past week. We're working through those challenges, but nothing that I've heard of is gonna conflict with what we have.
Great, thank you. Does this change anything in terms of, you have plans for a street and the neighbors don't like it? Does this give you any more clout or whatever? I mean, can
It
our
does.
neighbors?
We've been using the 1999 plan with those standard features to say, okay, bike lane's a standard feature and parking is not. And so when I've been removing parking, generally I've been relying on our street standards to say, this is what we have as an adopted standard. And if we also do parking counts and figure out what the utilization is of those parking spaces, and it's very light, we can say this actually isn't needed. And then we rely on our standards just to say, we're just gonna go ahead and do that. So this is gonna give us a lot more of those tools to say, okay, these are all potentially standard features, and here's what we would expect based on the land use context. And as the land use context changes, the street may have to change too, and I think this will give us some more leverage in making those changes, because it'll be an adopted document.
You mentioned that at 3,000 users per day on some of the multi-use paths, you might consider separating pedestrians and cyclists. I guess 2 questions about that. One is, are any of the paths segments anywhere close to that now? And then secondly, I suspect that as a rate of use, some are. Like I just biked down Amazon when the high school and Roosevelt let out, and it's a mess. It's it's you're dodging as you do that. And I guess, does that make a difference, rate of use as opposed to absolute daily use or something like that?
Not in what we've written. Now, in the past, we've had increased width standards for like sidewalks adjacent to schools. But now our standards are all much bigger than they used to be, and so we don't necessarily have that. I think the 3,000 is a number that we can come back to, and again, because we're adopting it administratively, we can change that as we need to. But I just want folks to keep in mind what that actually means, is if we build a redundant path system, then we got to build 50 more miles of path out there.
Yeah, no, I'm not.
And the paths that we
necessarily
have are
advocating it.
pretty much taking up all the space that we have to build paths. And so I think it's going to be sort of a tricky thing to implement. But when we have an opportunity like the new Riverfront Park, we did do great, our mode separating, right? So our opportunities are in the new stuff. Let's figure out what we think is going to happen there and design accordingly. And this gives us lots of detail on what to expect.
Yeah, so it's great to see these updates. I'm generally very supportive of it. And what I'm noticing is that this is titled A Complete Streets Guide. and yet it's focused on more than the street, but most of the right of way, including this amenity zone and potentially, but it doesn't really speak to any right of way that's beyond, say, the sidewalks. As far as I know, I haven't seen that. But the amenity zone seems to be in the context of how it affects the street or the sidewalk, but rather than have its value and its own purpose of like cooling the temperatures and providing habitat and so forth. And so it seems to be in large part sort of secondary to everything else. And that's probably because this is designed by the Transportation Division and not Urban Forestry. So I'm just wondering how that can be, like how, to what extent Urban Forestry and other departments are being able to advocate for the amenity zone as something independent of transportation.
They've said what you said. It's like, this is a really important component. And it's gotten wider. So in the 1999 standards, you might see out there, we have like 4-foot tree wells and stuff, and critical root zone is actually much bigger than that. So our standard is gonna be 6-foot minimum, and so it grows a little bit. Our overall right of way grows quite a bit. And so we don't have the opportunity to do complete streetscape redesigns very often. 8th Avenue was probably the last one, or the current one that we're working on, and even that, we didn't go from building front to building front. And so there's not going to be a lot of those. Again, our opportunity is in new development to make sure that those are getting out to the standards that we want. For folks who have been at the end of the North Delta Highway into what used to be the Nines, the golf course up there, you'll see very generous planter wells and tree wells and things, and that does follow our new standard. And then everything else is sort of a negotiation depending on how much right of way that we have. And so we're trying to fit stuff in there. And again, I think context is going to tell us a lot. If this is a block or a corridor that doesn't have any street trees, then let's not just say, okay, well, there's no room for that. Let's figure out how to get some of them in there. And that may come at the expense of things like travel lanes or turn lanes and things like that. And I think we've heard that loud and clear. There was a council work session yesterday, and they said trees, trees, trees. And so that's coming through loud and clear, I think. And I wasn't aware that we had a bias more toward transportation than about the different components of the streets. In fact, I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about the amenity zone and like what could be in there. And so in my mind, everything is, each of these components is necessary. And then we try to fit as many of them in as we possibly can. And again, I think where the compromises are going to come is less in the amenity zone and more in how much, what the level of service might be. So I think it's really going to come in terms of like travel lanes and things like that. But again, context matters a lot. Is this a frequent transit network where we have to, you know, have travel lanes that are effective and level of service that is okay? Or is it like a downtown environment where we would expect cars to go a lot slower, than where we can really focus on the pedestrian environment? And so we're sort of all over the place, and I didn't pick up on that bias, but if you did, that's a good comment, because I didn't realize it did that.
Yeah, it shows like hierarchy of modes, but it doesn't really explain how the amenity zone fits into that. And any decision point, it seems, at least historically, is the amenity zone is sort of the place where the compromise is made. So I would like to see, at least in the final document, some sort of, in certain circumstances, like in lower volume streets where the amenity zone has a higher priority.
Okay.
And it's, has some teeth.
Thanks.
Who maintains the amenities zone? Does the city do that?
Not usually. So, like downtown, we tend to maintain everything that's in the right of way, but that's an exception. University of Oregon campus tends to do that too. But like the sidewalk and the planter strip in front of your house,
Right.
That's all on you.
I had a question if I could butt in.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Peter.
Hello. So could you speak a little bit more to how easy or difficult it would be for these typologies to change? Like to provide an example, 6th and 7th in the WIT is mentioned as a potential climate-friendly, equitable community and could become a lot more dense. And I could see there being a lot of conflict between car commuters and LTD who want to have a lot of through lanes. And like if they were like multi-use developments along 6th and 7th, wanting it to become like a main street. Like, who would make that decision of changing the typology?
Well, 6th and 7th is the city of Eugene. We took jurisdiction away from ODOT a few years ago. However, it's still a state highway. It's still on the national highway system, and so there are certain federal guidelines that we have to follow. And so streets like that become really difficult because there's a lot of different competing priorities. We're aware that these are terrible places to walk and they have no bike facilities. And so, you know, if we have enough community support to make major changes, you know, I think certainly we would want to do that, but we've also got some limitations that are handed down to us from the state and federal governments. So they're just going to be a little bit more challenging. And yeah, I don't mean to sound not so hopeful about making changes on it, but this is really, really tough. West MX was a big lift too, and there was hundreds of millions of dollars available for that project. And I don't know if we're going to have that same opportunity in the future to make that level of change. It would take a major chunk of money. Although all things are possible, we got a raise grant for Franklin Boulevard, right? And that's like $31 million we're going to put into that corridor. But these happen once every 10 years, maybe. And so it would probably take us a while to get to 6th and 7th, but we are well aware that it divides the downtown and it divides our neighborhoods as well. And I think you can't tell your city councilor enough that these are major barriers and that we need to focus on them. Because if we have local support and these are local roads, then we can do some things. Again, we are somewhat hamstrung by their federal classifications, but there are some things we can do.
East of Jefferson West Side, I do notice its typology is commercial Main Street. Does it not have the same ODOT restrictions? Or east
Well, that's our local designation on it.
Okay,
That's what we said it should be.
got it.
Okay, well, we're well over time on this, Jerry.
Oh, no.
Make it real quick.
It's similar to Peter's question, but without all the federal and state issues. So I noticed on the South Eugene typology list, 29th between Amazon bus station and Woodville station is not coded as anything. It's just a regular street, but it's a street with massive bus, auto, bike, and pedestrian traffic. And so how, is there a mechanism to provide feedback or recommendations for something being kind of upgraded to something that might get more service to support that massive demand?
Sure, and one caveat on those maps is they're like 4 years old now.
Okay.
And they may not have been complete when we put them up, and they've been in a constant state of edit for the past few years.
Yeah.
And so as soon as I have new maps to put online, I'm gonna put them online. I talked to the city engineer about that today, and she's been messing with them and continues to do that. So when she feels comfortable with it, I'll make sure that we have an updated copy out there. Obviously, 29th is really important, and so we're definitely gonna put a color on that line. In fact, all the lines are gonna get colored, even the locals. And so we're trying to make that map not so busy. So most of the locals don't have color on them at all. We're gonna have to change all of that. We also wanted to put in things like alleys and some other things, and it's gonna be a big messy map, but we're gonna do it.
Okay, well, it's interesting stuff. Okay, thanks a lot, Reed. And you just took time for yourself because you're up next week.
That's okay.
The high and 7 signage.
So, I wish I would have taken a picture of Hyatt 7th. And so Hyatt 7th, this is where you have to cross if you're going northbound. You basically have to cross diagonally across 7th because the bike lanes become directional between 6th and 7th. And what we're hearing from folks is when they look straight ahead from the two-way bike lane straight forward, there's no bike signal because it's over here because we expect you to do this. And so I'm like, well, is there an existing MUTCD sign, Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which we can, oh, thank you. And so you go from a two-way environment here to that's one-way southbound and that's one-way northbound.
Oh, sorry, I just need to share. It says Peter, you can see the picture we're looking at.
And so when you look straight ahead, there's nothing right there. And so one of the things that we were asked to take a look at is there a sign that we can put up there that would do the job And I don't know the answer to that. And so if you put the slide back up, I said, is there anything in NUTCD that would explain it? And these two don't. And so if you go to the next one, I said, well, what if we drew something up? Like, could we do something that looks clear enough that tells the story? And I was like, well, what if we actually just draw the intersection and put a big old sign there and say, okay, this is what we want you to do. Maybe that's too wordy, maybe it doesn't make sense, like, I don't know what the answer is. But I would like some guidance from this group so that we can potentially draw some more things up so that we could maybe come back to you and sort of experiment with that. I don't know why I have that there.
I don't know why either. It was on the slide you gave me.
I probably edited that later and then I sent you the wrong slide.
Okay, well, don't
But
worry
this
about
is
that.
really what I was thinking of, is like, well, let's draw up what you're supposed to do. We've got a couple examples in the community of areas where we've done that at difficult intersections, like, you know, Coburg Road at Oakway at Club, we've got a little sign there that says you can cross this way or you can cross over here. And just kind of say, yeah, there's a lot of options here and you got to figure it out. This one is about putting something on the far side, on the mast arm of the signal. So that when folks look for a signal, and they don't find one, there's something for them to look at that is then informative so that they can find the signal, which is not gonna be where they thought it was. It's gonna be over there.
Cause what we're hearing is you go down High Street the entire time, right? And you've been looking right here
Yeah.
the whole time. And then all of a sudden you get to 7th and you look there and there's nothing. And people have been missing this.
And it's probably a mistake you only make once, like you figure it out after that. But this could be stressful enough that you don't wanna do it again.
Yeah.
Like, so like that's
Or if
not,
you're visiting, you only did it once.
yeah,
So the sign would hang right there?
right.
And it would be big.
It would have to be big.
Yeah.
You,
Could you,
It can be big because you shouldn't have any big trucks going through there.
could you replace that bollard with a sign?
Put a little
that-
sign there, yeah.
Yeah,
oh,
which, I mean, even almost any sign, because you're like running right into that, and if that was a sign,
But
just.
you notice, I know, but we've got like an arrow painted right here.
Yeah.
There's an arrow here in green with a big, this is,
Yeah.
we put stuff down on the ground.
Yeah.
For folks to find, and they're not finding it.
The other thing, I went out there today just to scout it, is to have more arrows going back from the intersection, like
Uh-huh.
if you counted like 4 white arrows on the road with that left-hand turn thing, before you even started thinking about the light, you would, I think by the time you got to the 4th or 5th one, you would be like, oh, I'm supposed to be going that way.
What some communities will do also is they'll put little chevrons through the whole thing, so like basically little arrows through the whole diagonal lane, basically. We could also color that green. That was sort of a compromise with maintenance because they didn't want that much green out there. But it probably needs green, so I think that's low hanging
Diagonal
fruit.
down, Renaissance is green, isn't it?
mhm.
Just at the corners,
But
Oh,
it's
it's
like,
not the
it's
whole
like
thing?
big, it's big
Yeah,
green at the.
but it's not through the
corners,
travel
so-
lanes, and that was for the same thing, because this is gonna wear tire tracks through it. We're gonna have to maintain it all the time. And it's like, I don't think you do. Just get enough green out there that it still looks green and don't really worry about the tire tracks, but.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I would think you could add green like striping, like you see on the left there.
Yeah.
So
But
that-
folks, remember, folks are sort of looking straight ahead.
Yeah.
And so
It
if they're
makes
not
people
seeing,
green too.
yeah, yeah, that's there too. It's like, okay, am I supposed to go that way now?
Might as
What
well
about
hang
a
a
sign there? That's a good idea, right?
What should the sign say?
Oh, bikes use bound northbound, bikes use diagonal,
Would you be
Yeah.
able,
If it's too
Like-
detailed, the sign,
like
it's gonna be too
you,
hard to read.
diagonally.
I mean, if you had it there where it's like in people's way, I mean, it really could be as simple as a bike and an arrow, not pointing exactly where you need to
And I
go.
think that's what I probably had an arrow here, which is just like a bike and then an arrow that goes boop, like that.
Mhm.
Or like
'Cause I'm like, I can't get
instructions.
much simpler than that. Just put a bike there and an arrow that just says go diagonally now.
Yeah, or like, just look to your right, you know, like an instruction. Yeah, like,
I
Is
noticed,
it bad to put something like right in front? I mean, because the other ones coming, they're gonna, the ones traveling south are gonna hit this lane, and the ones going north really is kind of like, don't go any further,
Mhm.
go that way. I mean, I don't know what kind of obstruction you could put there,
it would be a
Well-
smaller sign.
just a sign, yeah.
Yeah, along those same.
But like right in front of them, can you do that, or?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Peter has asked me to let him share this. Do you want to say something, Peter?
yeah, would just like, I'm thinking exactly on the mast arm where people have been trained to look for the bike signal. Could you put a bike route, but instead of maybe a right arrow, put like a up and right arrow? Because I know my parents were saying that's exactly where they were looking, so having some sort of bike route sign there perhaps could be helpful.
Yeah, my concern would be people would turn right onto Seventh and find themselves on a highway.
Yeah,
And I don't want them to do that at all. But yeah, something simple. I like the idea of simple.
Or could it say bike signal with an arrow, and so it like makes your eye look over towards the
But
signal?
that's inconsistent with the rest of them.
Yeah,
That's what I was missing.
Is there an arrow that's not right, but like
Yeah, if the arrow is more like diagonal.
Yeah, McKenna?
There's a sign in chapter 9 of the MUTCD, which is the R9-22 that says bicycles must exit with a little diagonal.
yeah.
So you could, instead of like the bicycles must exit, like do the bicycle symbol and then the arrow.
That's what I think that slide was supposed to show is the
Yeah.
bike.
Yeah.
And then it would say, could it say like bike
So
diagonal?
this is a big arrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's pretty clear.
I think another thing to consider is that you don't want bikes going straight, so is there like a do not enter kind of sign?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Oh,
you know how you, when you
Yeah.
are
we
trying to
could
get on
put
the
a do not enter
highway,
there.
you're
like
like,
right there,
I shouldn't
maybe?
go on this road.
Well, no, that gets tough.
Right, struck the other.
Having an arrow on the
Yeah,
ground
exactly. That's
with a
what we said.
bicycle facing,
Right here, big arrow going this way.
yeah,
Oh,
Oh,
with a
yeah.
bike, that would help.
Simple.
Yeah, that's
it's a
true.
Simple one, big arrow showing that.
Showing that you're supposed to be going that way.
Yeah.
And northbound use diagonal, can you put that like right on the ballard there or something? I don't know.
Yeah, we could put a small sign on that.
Uh-huh.
I don't know how long it would be there.
Uh-huh.
the green paints is not a bad idea too, like you said.
Yeah.
More green paint.
Okay, so to just like
Little
capture
things.
these, just to repeat what I feel like we're hearing. Paint the diagonal crossing green.
Or at least stripe it like the other one.
Yeah.
Maybe a southbound arrow in the southbound lane. Sign on bollard. And then sign on mast arm.
That would be classic.
And for the two signs, like keep signs simple, like just bike signal or bike insignia arrow.
Yeah.
And I do think more arrows on the pavement leading up to the intersection would actually, by the time you got there, people would have gotten the message.
What would the arrows? what would
No,
the
they would
arrows
just be
say?
like the arrow that's, already there, and there may be one further back. Just showing that you're gonna be doing something else when you get to the intersection, so that people are aware. Yeah, so there's this arrow, so just arrows just like that, but like 3 or 4 more, or maybe 2 or 3 more of them further back, not in the green zone, but before you get to it.
That are like maybe slightly diagonal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, you kind
Yeah.
of key you into
Cool.
something's
Yeah,
changing on your approach and before you're even thinking about looking up for the turn signal or for the bicycle signal.
Reed, I have a question.
Hmm.
It looks like maybe where you are in there, is there a bike on the street next to that white?
No,
arrow?
it's just an arrow.
Maybe could you add more bike stencils along with that arrow? Because in this intersection, there's dashed lines for cars, and so maybe bikes are assuming that's a car related stripe.
That's true, they might be thinking that.
I feel like the maintenance guys put that little diagonal thing in there and drew that up, because that's not how we would normally do that.
They're
Yeah.
like, this'll be easy to maintain.
Yeah. But nobody knows what it is.
I like that the bike signal is on the right side. I feel like that helps indicate that you should go that
Right,
direction.
once you find the bike
Yeah.
signal, it's
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah, but I can see how people go up there and don't even see it.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it's a little confusing at first, for sure.
Okay,
Will, I think it's important in your notes, that you specify where a southbound arrow in the lane would occur, because if it were, say where that Sanders board is, that might not be helpful. So the position is important, and so you're standing where that person is waiting at the crosswalk line there, they're looking out, so they need to be able to see the arrow coming
So
the other
they'd be like
direction.
Right at
in
the
this.
end, right?
Yeah, right there, and maybe even one also on the other side, actually, about where that cyclist is, So that people aren't tempted, because there's a certain, I think,
Yeah.
percentage of the population that know they're supposed to go to the right, but don't do it anyway.
Right, cause they're gonna like just turn left on them.
Just like, this is easy, just go straight, and then I'll just, you know.
They're in trouble at
Twice, and I'm
6.
not gonna do it again. It doesn't work well.
You did it once and you were like, this is,
Yeah,
cause
well,
then you get to
yeah, I
sixth
got
and then.
impatient. I didn't wanna wait for the signal, so I just go this way and then cut over. It's like, oh, it's hard to do. Anyway, the good news is, if this is becoming an issue, it's because there are people who are not familiar with the bikeway system who are
Mhm.
riding on this and don't necessarily realize that the next, block of bike lane is on the other side. So it's
Mhm.
new.
You're right.
Yeah, yeah.
It's good. There are new people
We've
who-
got some we're converting
Yeah.
people.
We could probably put a temporary sandwich board out there too, just to get more.
A temporary sandwich board that maybe has
Hey, guys.
like this one.
Go
on it,
there now, yeah.
That's kind of like more informative
Yeah.
while we,
Do 6 or 7 things. and-
yeah, do 10 signs out there, just get a big flashing red arrow.
I thought Wes just to have somebody out there just pointing.
Well, that has happened. Some communities have done that, especially when you open something up. If something's tricky, you might just want to be out there for a little bit. And so if somebody wants to observe, and if you see a lot of stuff, maybe we should get some folks out there in some orange vests just to kind of help
Yeah.
folks figure it out.
Yeah, on like a sunny Sunday or
Yeah.
whatever the biking day
Yeah.
is, yeah. I'll type that up, folks in orange vests.
Thank you. I guess it can be yellow. I don't.
All
I
right,
mean, this is
thank
pretty
you.
sad.
Okay, thanks, Reed. Yeah, we've got a 5-minute break now. So,
Don't you have a big event?
Yeah. Next weekend.
This weekend, I was surprised you were here, really, and June
Yeah.
struck me as a meeting you would probably miss.
No, yeah, still here. Got family starts trickling in on Friday.
Oh, wow. Very exciting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm very exciting. Got a lot of little things that are happening.
Feel like it's under control, though, not being a stressful.
I'm sure that's me within like a week, I'll probably feel that different, but
Is this coming weekend or the one after?
the 22nd.
Right. Oh, yeah, this is Thursday, yeah. Okay, right.
Yeah, if it was next week, I would not.
No, there's.
Yeah.
And then there are 2 different types of collectors. There was.
You told me it's out at Sweet Cheek. What other things, are there other fun things happening around it?
Remove functional class.
Not
I think
really.
Later on. top of that, That takes
bunch of
in,
wineries
like,
up
things like
there.
density, because we would want to know, like, how many, so like, all these buildings going up, like, people stored in them.
Oh, yeah, I meant other events associated with the wedding. other than-
Oh,
And like, that's a lot of big.
yeah, the usual, we've got a rehearsal
On the streets,
on
we
Friday, rehearsal on
There's-
Friday.
Because right now, they're
Dinner
either
that
stopping in
same
the
day,
lane,
and then we're just doing like a
or they're pulling up in the driveways, or
Um,
bike
maybe
lanes. and
the
kind
day
of all that stuff.
after.
So people plan
We've
for
got
it,
a
and
whole
folks
mini-
kind of take the matter in their own hands, and sometimes they make
Next,
that.
or the last week of January, just be that on
Uh-huh.
there.
They are.
Maybe do,
And we use them a lot.
we'll be in a
for our
hotel like the
traffic
first,
calming
we've got a
program.
place to stay the first couple nights and then we
Yeah.
can go camping.
So there's the.
Pick up the dogs and go camping.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Mini moon, I hadn't heard that term before.
Yeah,
But-
it's
boots that you
No,
can
that's
wear
not
40 below
expensive.
zero.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Something bad is happening.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'll just send them.
Yeah. We do see a little more than once a year. Veterans inspection.
Yeah.
I still have all of our skates up there. We have the skate teams. We've been here 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no way, yeah.
So I think it looks like it's Willow now.
Yeah, we're gonna switch it up a little bit
Oh.
just cause, Jody's here a little early, so we thought we'd get her going. She doesn't have to stay for all the other stuff. So we're gonna talk about the downtown transit study, which is exciting because we've been talking to you guys about this for a while, and we actually have some like alternatives to share. Which is cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you, Willow. I think I've met a lot of you, but if not, I'm Jody Trendler with the Transportation Planning Team. And we came here in April and spoke about this study, and at that point, we were just kicking off. And as Willow mentioned, since then we've developed a couple of scenarios that we'd like to get your feedback on tonight. We've also been doing a few focus groups, so I'm gonna sort of give you the rundown similar to how we're talking with our focus groups. So Willow, feel free to tag in at any time because you're pretty familiar with this content too. I'm gonna try to go quickly through some of the things the things we've learned, some of our findings from the study, so that we have time for some discussion. We have about 20 minutes. So I'll go through our study overview and goals as a refresher for some, or maybe this is new for some of you. Then I'll talk a little bit about the key findings from our downtown transit service market analysis and sort of best practices research. And then we'll get into the service scenarios. I'll just give you an overview of those and we can have some discussion. We'd really like to hear from this group tonight about what you see as the pros and cons or things that are missing from these scenarios we've generated. We don't have to pick one tonight, but we are hoping to move towards like a recommended scenario, or it can be a hybrid. So we'd love to pick your brains on that. All right. So reminder of some of our goals for this study. Primarily, we're looking to better connect some of the major destinations in downtown Eugene, and this includes places you're all familiar with, Fifth Street Market, the park blocks, Eugene Station, but also plan for access to the new Riverfront district. So a lot of new housing is going in. We have our new city hall, and there will be some affordable housing being built in the coming years. So planning ahead for this kind of new draw of people visiting, living and working over closer to the river. We're also looking to create something that helps connect the close-in neighborhoods to the core of Eugene, especially for some of the residents on the fringes, like near Skinner Butte. We want to make sure we have connection for older adults and people with limited abilities who rely on transit, and more so than biking and walking. And then finally, just a pretty general, but we're just looking to support Eugene pandemic recovery and making Eugene a prosperous and a nice place to be. So some of the things we're not looking at, excuse me. We're not looking at any east-west service. So one of the first things we realized when we started this study is that we have really great east-west connection through downtown with our MX system. It's pretty robust. It has the highest ridership in the system, and so does Eugene Station have the highest ridership in the service area. So we're not looking to make any additional investments along those corridors. Those are also really well served by our active transportation infrastructure and bike share and former scooter share. We're not really looking to bridge any long distances or major barriers. So some of the peer cities we looked at had big hills or other physical barriers that they were addressing with their downtown transit. That's not really the issue here so much as it's a shorter distance across town, maybe a mile from downtown station to the riverfront. And lastly, we're not looking to make a major capital investment. So sorry, no gondolas, no monorails, no more MX at this time. So this is just a laundry list of the things we looked at in our market analysis, essentially looking to see what is the market for transit in this study area, sort of in the map that's shown. So
That map there shows the density of population. The biggest factors are where people live and where they work, but we also looked at some key demographics of people who tend to ride the bus, older adults, people with disabilities, lower income households. We also looked at kind of existing transportation network and bus network, bus volumes and ridership to see how people are using LTD's system downtown. We looked at the locations of parking, which really goes hand in hand with transit demand. And we also reviewed our bike and scooter share hotspots. We kind of made a ridership map and we were able to see a lot of use in that east-west corridor. We mapped out some mobility barriers. Largely, a lot of them are like perceived barriers, but some are real barriers like the railroad tracks that give us only a couple of access points to the riverfront. And then lastly, we looked at travel patterns using some cell phone data. So we were able to see the relative volume of trips being made within and to and from downtown to see kind of where people are going today. We also did a peer review and looked at best practices. We looked at some communities that are similar in size and maybe have a university that have bike share and maybe have a more small scale walkable downtown. We also documented our previous experience with MGO. So some of the communities on the board had services we were interested in looking at to see how they were working. Like Long Beach had a similar product to MGO. Colorado Springs and Lincoln both have sort of a bigger bus that circulates downtown. So we evaluated those and we're looking to see what might be a good fit for us.
Do people know what MGO was?
That's a good question.
No.
Some nods, but some nods this way. So this little picture here is there was a pilot that started in 2019. And it was operating until the pandemic started in the sort of closures due to the pandemic in 2020. It was a small service area, maybe a mile perimeter or smaller, and it was a free service where you could call it with your phone and get a ride point to point within that. So it had about 60 bus stops, so you would go to your spot and wait for it. That was discontinued as part of the pandemic, and so we did document sort of what happened there. And when we get to the scenarios, you'll see kind of we've built upon those lessons learned.
What were the lessons learned?
Here they are. Thank you. So this is a lot of text, but I do want to kind of run through this and then we'll get into Eugene and our scenarios. But some of the lessons learned is that service should be simple, direct, and easy to understand. It should be really frequent. So it's not a competition, but it sort of needs to compete with a walking trip. If you have to wait 15 minutes for your bus to come, you might otherwise walk. 7 days a week is a best practice. And it doesn't have to be a circulator bus, microtransit, like the MGO is considered a microtransit, a smaller vehicle transit could be a supplement to the larger vehicles. And considering the size of the place, so you're asking what the lessons learned was the scale of the MGO service area was a bit small, and I think that had hampered its success. Continue offering our shared mobility options and our micro mobility. We want to look at ways to kind of tie those things together and have like bike share co-located with our transit center, for example. Offering free or low fares was seen across the peers as one of the best practices, especially in the downtown area, to help kind of remove that barrier for getting on and off. You don't need to know how much it costs. You don't have to have a pass. You don't have to get a new app and add your credentials. You can just jump on. So that makes it a little easier, more appealing to people. The vehicle type should match our service goals. So we'll maybe talk a little bit more about vehicle types in a minute. Branding and marketing were seen to be really important pieces. A lot of downtown services have a separate branding, like a bus wrap. And I think we talked last time about how that could also lead to some confusion. So we have a lot of different brands driving around our downtown. So there's a balance there. But having a unique name and making it really legible and clear to people what this bus does. And the last one, we'll need to think about aligning the operations and who's running the service and how we're paying for it with the goals of the service. Okay. Oh, here's where I do have some QR codes throughout the presentation. So want to put in a plug. I think LTD might have called in, but this is part of the LTD system review is one of the recommendations on the long-term service recommendation is improving transit circulation in downtown Eugene. So this study is helping with that, and we're doing, as we do this deeper dive. They have a survey open right now online with their recommendations route by route. So if you're a bus rider and you want to know what they're recommending, hop on there and take a look and find your route, and you can see if they have any proposals to increase the frequency. So there's some slight adjustments in routing. And they have some great recommendations to improve frequency just by offsetting schedules. So they're not even changing the amount of resources going into the route, but they're offsetting the buses so that a bus might come every 15 minutes on certain streets. We also are building upon some recent engagement efforts. So Move Huge and Downtown Youth were both efforts locally to hear what the community needs. And so we've been scouring that for feedback from the community to make sure we're really listening to what's already been said to us. This is too many slides. Okay, skip this one. Okay, this is my last one before we go to the scenarios. One of the things we looked into was just the types of transit that might be a good fit downtown. So I wanted to call your attention, we've got a check mark. We actually already have bus rapid transit with our MX, which is one of the things we see in other cities as a lot of cities are aiming for that today. The ones circled in green are the three that we're going to talk about next. So micro transit, which is like a smaller vehicle in a zone, local circulator, which is more of a fixed route, and then utilizing the existing local fixed routes. Those were what we considered the best fit for our downtown. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead. I want to be able to get to the conversation. Thank you. So our base scenario is actually that LTD system review that I mentioned. So these blue highlighted areas are places where they're proposing to create frequent transit corridors through our downtown. So some communities we looked at, just they utilize good branding to say, hey, if you walk out to the street, you know you're gonna be able to catch the bus on West 11th. So that's one option, and this is kind of showing you the basis of what we're assuming could be in place as the baseline. Let's see. So this is for this purposes of this study, this is a cost neutral recommendation. And then I'm going to share 3 scenarios, and then I'm going to pause so we can discuss. And if you also have questions about all of the findings, I know that was kind of a big long list of things. So we'll go through these one by one. The first one is an on-demand zone, similar to the MGO, but we've drawn the MGO service area in yellow. This expands it to a further area where you might feel less inclined to walk all the way across this. The previous area was about a 15-minute walk end to end. This is being considered similar to MGO. It would be low or no fare. And a specially branded sort of unique vehicle. And we would want to have about 6 to 8 of these in circulation to make this be able to arrive in a short amount of time. So it's in order to reduce waiting. This scenario, as well as the next one, a small vehicle will be able to serve inside the Riverfront District, which is built with these really walkable streets that are too narrow for a standard LTD bus. So one of the pros of this scenario, as well as scenario 2, is that a smaller vehicle could serve directly to the riverfront, to the plaza, to City Hall on those narrow new roads. Scenario 2 is a circulator that's a downtown circulator using a smaller bus. That exact vehicle hasn't been determined, but this would be something small enough to navigate through the Riverfront District and create sort of a bi-directional loop, looping through downtown and serving City Hall, the post office, Amtrak station, connecting right through Willamette Street, past the Eugene station, and then tying this all the way down to 18th, which would give people living downtown access to a lower cost grocery store and the pharmacy there and at Highlands, and then going back up Hilliard or Patterson, depending on the direction. This would also be free or low fare and have unique branding, and this could probably replace Route 1, which serves a piece of this. So this could be expansion of that route. And lastly, we wanted to see what would a circulator look like if we use the standard bus? So this would allow us to utilize existing fleet resources to create a downtown circulator route. So this is similar to the last one, in that it goes as close as we can to the riverfront district and city hall, but because of the vehicle type, it doesn't go into the riverfront. And then it stays on Fifth Avenue. The exact routing could change, especially after our conversations, but we have it here going down Olive and then Willamette again to the Safeway and Highlands down to 18th and back up. So that would be a standard, probably like a 40-foot bus, and could also replace Route 1 and be a free or low fare bus with potentially unique branding. All right, I'm gonna pause. Next slide, I think, has our question, so.
Oh.
Yeah. So now that you've seen these scenarios and also some of our findings, would love to hear from this group about these potential options, what to prefer and why, and also any feedback you have about what we might be missing or other things we should be thinking about.
Charlotte.
Jody, thank you. I really want to put a pitch in for the minibuses. I've seen them work really well in Cape Town, South Africa, of all places. And they were essentially like Volkswagen buses. And they were running every 5 minutes, and they had service areas that would go real fast to one place, and then there'd be lots of stops along the way. So I guess it's scenario 1 and 2 has more of that than 3. And it just enabled more people to get on the bus. So thank you.
Oh, it was Alan. and
I've
then
got a
there's
couple
another one.
of questions. In scenario 1, you've got the service area stopping at 16th Avenue, but then scenario 2, you've got a circulator bus that goes all the way to 18th. So, and I think it's really valuable to go to 18th for the reasons you mentioned, but I'm not sure why you cut the service area only to 16th on scenario 1.
Thank you. That's a good observation. I think that as this conversation has progressed, I think we would probably extend this to 18th for those reasons. So I think the map initially, we thought, oh, we're only looking towards 13th. We realized we kind of need to extend our map. So I agree. I think that in this scenario, we should probably be looking down at sort of.
Yeah, there might be areas to the west or the north to cut if you have to make it a certain size. And then my second comment, which I'm now forgetting. So you better go on to someone else, I'll come back.
Sounds good. Lucy.
Oh,
Wait, Charlie, then Lucy? Lucy, then Charlie.
Lucy, I think is first. Go, Lucy.
yeah, I was like, do I want to ask a question? Yeah, great scenario. Thank you for thinking all this through. For scenario 2 is the one I wanted to look at. I like that idea. Yeah, the idea of having a circulator. Just curious as to how you decided on this path. I would think the university has a pretty large population that, if you maybe could scoot it over 1 block, that you'd capture more of those people. That's one comment I wanted to add. Was there a certain study that went into this this path, or?
This is maybe 2 parts. So about that part of the alignment. I think we're thinking this still gets you pretty close to within walking distance of the university. But we are trying to you can see there's a yellow line showing sort of the underlying service with it. So trying to kind of fill in that area that's missing. So, and then I think these just have a direct line up to the riverfront, which is really convenient. I don't have to take, I guess that's Patterson going north.
Yeah.
But that's a good note. I'll take note of that.
Yeah, I think just adding that little right-hand turn and then going north and then left, that little square that kind of swoops up the.
Right over
towards
to
the
there's the
university.
UVO has a transit station basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, so a couple of questions. One, it seems like these all would have a different potential capacity. Have you done estimates of like what the capacity for each of these might be? And why contemplate that, I'll just say, my basic inclination is I also love scenario 2, but I'm curious as to. Particularly scenario 1 seems like it might have lower capacity than.
Right, that's a good question. We haven't done any like sort of forecasting of ridership that would give us that capacity estimate. So I think that would be something we need to think about. What we've been thinking and more in terms of is the number of vehicles needed to provide that fast turnover, especially for scenario 1. And so ideally that keeps people moving, but there could be times, especially if we're providing service directly into the riverfront. There could be times when there's like, when it's game day, that like, we're gonna have way more calls than we can supply, but I think, and then I think there's probably gonna be some peaks. that we-
I have a couple questions.
ahead.
I remember what they are. So for scenario 1, for it to work well, would probably ideally require people to have a smartphone. So if you're at a grocery store, you're not going to be able to find a payphone or other way to be able to hail the service. So I think I'd be curious to know whether you have determined what percentage of the population in that service area are likely to be able to have access to a smartphone. Not everyone does. And then my second comment or question is, for those who have been in Eugene for a long time, remember that there was a circular bus called the Breeze. And there were several different routes, but one of them was a downtown route. And what did we learn from that? It's not running anymore, so why did it stop? And what do we know about that could be useful in this situation?
Great questions. We haven't done any analysis of smartphone ownership. So I do think that's important to keep in mind, especially older adults may not be as comfortable using an app and figuring out how to call the bus. So for that scenario 1, typically those do have some kind of call-in option with a phone, but again, if you're at the store, you pay phone. It's not as simple or available. So it's a good consideration. I see that Jeremy's online, so I'll try to respond about the Breeze, but he might want to unmute and give a response. I believe the Breeze preceded our MX system, and so it used to go to campus, and then it went to Valley River, and so I suspect that was somewhat replaced by the MX, but
LTE just is, from what I understand, I was a driver at the time, but we took out the Breeze because the MX went in. It was part of the MX implementation. It gave the U of O much more frequent service. Part of that is, part of the reason we aren't going down Patterson and Hilliard is because the U of O a lot of service. So that's one of the reasons we chose that alignment. But yeah, I think the Breeze went away as part of the MX implementation because they were going to get 10-minute service between Eugene Station and the U of O. And we have the 66 and 67, which both travel to Valley River Center. And Peter Smith, he's online. He's had his hand up for a little bit. I'm going to throw it over to him.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks. So I really love the route of scenario 3. I feel like it's really efficient and easy to understand. Yeah, I feel like the Hilliard and Patterson is a bit redundant. I don't know if it would be worth it. Though I bet further analysis would be better than just my hypothesizing there. But could you do scenario 3's route with scenario 2's buses? Because I feel like with the amount of turns that are still in it, it would probably be a lot faster to have not 40-foot buses doing all those tight downtown turns. And having like smaller like MGO vehicles doing this route. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that as we try to look at like what is our recommended scenario, it could end up being a hybrid of some sort. So that's a good comment. Thank you, Peter.
I don't get why do you like this route better than the other one, Peter?
I'm curious too.
It just seems a lot more cheaper to run lots of service. The other one said it needed 5 vehicles. This only needs 2. And I think far more important than getting to one block of where you need to go is just being able to show up and know a bus is going to be there within 10 minutes. Like I live next to MX, and that's why I love it so much, is even though another bus route is closer to me, I can just show up to MX and not even think about it and get on a bus. So be able to have like a simpler route that can be a lot more frequent which I think scenario 3 is, would be a lot more useful than scenario 2's very long route.
Oh, so I see. You could make it more frequent because it's a shorter route.
Yeah, that would be my thinking.
Oh, and I didn't really talk much about the cost, but we did it in terms of dollar signs, 1, 2, 3. And so this is like our $1 sign scenario. I think he was reacting to that idea too.
Oh, Mary?
Well, I like number 2, but I think it's interesting what Peter was just saying. I think that the MGO, I remember when it was around and I was like, what's that? I don't get it. And I don't know how to access it. And I guess I'll just walk. But, and so I think it's a barrier to be like, how do you communicate that to people who are out of town, like how to work it? And I mean, for visitors and things like that, and for everyone. And so I think the predictability of having something going around that's branded and, you know, I don't know what, I think it'd be a lot easier to communicate. And I think it would get more use. I like a circuit though. I like a square. Somehow that's very feng shui or something. But I can understand, the frequency would be really compelling. So if a more direct route had it, was able to increase the frequency, then that would be compelling, because I think every 5 minutes, of course, would be better, but I can't imagine, you know, the cost of that. But the more frequent, the better for sure, and I love that it's free. I think that's excellent.
I'd speak up. I'd support Peter's thought here. I would probably change the route a little from this, but the, you know, loops are great unless they're too long. And then if, you know, you're getting on at one end of the loop and you actually only wanted to go a little bit further back from where the bus is going, you end up having to ride the whole loop all the way around to get back to. So loops work well if they're really short, but less well maybe if they're really long. And just knowing that I can get back to where I started just by crossing the street and catching the bus going the other direction is a real benefit for bus riders,
Yeah.
I think.
Actually, could you go to slide of scenario 2? I think one thing to note about our concept right now is that this would go both directions.
Oh, it would,
So
okay.
you could like feasibly go just up and down Willamette without having to ride the whole way. But I also think that's a good observation that there would be some out of direction riding. Like if you're going from downtown to the riverfront, you have to go around one way or the other. So it's noting, you know.
Both directions definitely mitigate that.
I had a question based on the slide 1, or just the MGO concept in general. I'm sure there were like case studies or, you know, best case scenario evaluations done when it was stood up, but how have you seen it in other cities, and like, is it successful? How does it work? Yeah, we've seen this in a couple other places. So Long Beach is one of the peers that we looked at. And then also while we were doing this study, a new one launched in Bellevue, Washington, which is just near Seattle. A lot of the time they're built in with like a visitor services. So really marketed to visitors and people who are coming downtown, which we identified as being one of our markets. So we're kind of watching those, and they are working in some of those markets from what we've seen. But this is like our highest dollar sign. Yeah. So I think they work, but they do require a bit more investment. Okay, just curious. Anyway, I've never seen a free kind of shuttle service on demand anywhere before. Yeah, I haven't personally had a chance, but pretty luxurious sounding.
And in Cape Town, Lucy, it was 25 cents. And they were going kind of on demand. So it works beautifully there.
I'm not sure who it was, but someone talked about they couldn't figure it out and I might as well walk. And that's kind of hitting the nail on the head with why MGO didn't work as well. I mean, the service area is smaller. We find with most on-demand services, if you make it available and people start to use it, the wait times start to grow exponentially. So if you have 3 people on one side of that block and 3 people up at, you know, down the south side, and you have 3 people up at Campbell Center, those wait times are going to be even longer. And you would have to have, I mean, you have to scale up the number of vehicles, and it does get much more expensive as you go through. But again, it's like, if you don't have a smartphone, how are you gonna get it? We would have to have a call center. We'd have to teach people how to use the app, teach people how to call for the ride, and then they're waiting and not, the wait time could be 5 minutes, it could be 25 minutes, depending on how busy the service is at the time. So it's less consistent, it's less reliable, and it's slower potentially than just a regular bus.
Just putting myself in the queue, I don't know where we are, agenda.
Time wise, yeah, we're gonna have to cut some stuff from the
Yeah.
agenda, yeah.
I would say the whole point is for this to be nimble and easy, and full-size LTD buses do not suggest nimble and jazzy, and so I would say not that. I do think it's important to serve the Riverfront District and the City Hall. So I'm not necessarily attached to the full loop down Patterson or Hilliard, but I think at least having that loop. And I don't know if, there's a bazillion student housing units right along whether it's Franklin Boulevard or Mill Street or whatever it's called there. I don't know if it's important to serve those, but I think the Riverfront District and City Hall, it needs to be included.
Are you looking for any kind of consensus from the ATC or more just this kind of feedback?
This
Okay.
is perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
we don't need you to be make a decision tonight, but I do really appreciate everyone kind of just mulling over these and helping give us like a bit more nuance, because every focus group we've had, I feel like people have brought out a different approach. So I like this.
And if you could make it really quick.
Yeah, I've appreciated your service on the people in your Poet Terrace. Because that's a tremendous number of people who need to get somewhere, and most of them don't have a car. My concern, as a person who's ridden the bus over decades, is a smaller bus puts you in closer contact with everyone on that bus. And in Eugene, that can mean mentally ill people, people in some sort of addictive crisis, violent or aggressive people as well, that I've encountered on the bus. And so my concern, I have a horrible time now trying to get people my age and older even get on the bus because they're afraid of who is riding the bus. I know what I've encountered myself, and it was nice to have a full-size bus in which to separate yourself from the action and hopefully get to your destination. So I know that's not a PC thing to say, but it's a reality of what bus riding can be.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Jody.
Yeah, thank you all for your feedback tonight. Next steps for this, we're gonna be working with our consultant team and with LTD to come up with hopefully a recommendation or service scenarios. And then we're going to get a little more in depth about the operations and the costs and start to understand what a proposal would look like. We also want to get feedback from the community. We haven't done a lot of public engagement on this idea yet. And then from there, we would be looking for sort of like funding and implementation. We also have a plan to look at sort of prioritizing transit routing through downtown and looking at how our streets work and thinking about whether there's transit streets and other types of streets and kind of doing a typology. So that is one of the other steps here. So, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I have one question. Maybe you mentioned this, but is there an implementation timeline for these routes or?
There is not, although the system review implementation would be something around this winter. So if we came up with, if what we move forward with is something that is part of that, that would be the soonest that something would be happening. And then other ideas that are gonna take a longer time, they might be something that we would see next year.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
You bet, thanks.
Thanks, Jody. All that.
Yeah.
All right.
I think I got it all. Okay. So on our agenda, we have bicycle friendly city. So Shane is applying to be a platinum level bicycle friendly city for Eugene. He thinks that we are ready for that designation. We got gold back in 2009 and we've been at gold since then. We reapplied in 2019, but we just reapplied for gold. to keep our gold status. We didn't really feel ready for platinum. Now, a lot has happened since 2019. And Shane made a presentation, a recorded presentation that I was gonna show tonight. We were just gonna like watch him. But it's recorded, so it might be a useful thing to just send out to you all since we're short on time. Because it's more of an informing you. It's not, there's not like a ton for you to offer feedback on, but I would definitely recommend that you all watch it because he does go through, you know, what happened in 2009, what happened in 2019, and then just like the really significant progress that we've made in the 5 years since 2019 with like tons of protected bikeways, like shift community cycles got started, like our education, the number of safe routes to school coordinators we have now is like so many compared to the one that we had before. Now there's like 5 of them, serving like thousands of students. So Shane thinks we're ready. So if you watch that presentation and you have something that you feel like is really significant that we should highlight in the application, just based on your experience living in Eugene or something that you think is really, really important, that would be worth like messaging me and being like, hey, when you do the application, mention this. I just think it's really important. Or perhaps in Shane's presentation, he missed something where you're like, oh, Shane, there's also this important active transportation bicycle thing that's happening that maybe you forgot. So that would be the 2 places to offer feedback. But I'll just send out the presentation if that works for you all. It's only 10 minutes. Yeah, it's definitely worth watching.
When is his application due?
I think that's a good question. I don't know the exact date, but I do know that Shane was like, I need to go to this ATC meeting. So I do think that within the next couple weeks, we would need to hear from you guys. Yeah.
Maybe you can clarify that and put it in the email, so that.
Okay. Yeah, so you have a deadline. Yeah, deadlines are helpful for me too. Okay, let me just make a note of that. Get deadline from Shane.
I'm sure I could probably Google this, but do you have an idea of the other platinum bicycle friendly cities out there?
I believe there's only 5. I think Portland was the first ever platinum bicycle friendly city in the States. Minneapolis, and then there's like 3 others. Davis,
Okay.
I think,
Yeah.
California.
Mhm.
Fort Collins,
Mhm.
Colorado, I think is the other one, and then there's one more, I'm forgetting.
Okay.
But Eugene like would be contending with the big, like we'd be
Yeah.
playing with the big boys if we were able to get platinum. We'd be up there with like some major cities that are like really well known, but we're also really well known for being a bicycle friendly city. So after platinum is diamond. So there is
There is
another
some- oh my
level.
gosh.
Diamond is pretty much like European standard,
Yeah.
and Shane wanted to be really, really clear that if we get platinum, we're not like, check, we're done. We don't need to worry about this anymore. Like we still have a ton to work on. And there is another classification that we would basically be orienting ourselves to be like, all right, let's go. Like we're going for diamond. And maybe we could become the first ever diamond city in the US in 10 years. That'd be cool.
Let's do it.
We just gotta keep pushing. And he says that in his presentation. He's like, we gotta keep pushing.
Google said it's Davis, Boulder, Fort Collins, Portland, and Madison.
Okay,
Oh,
so
Madison.
not Minneapolis, Madison,
Madison.
Yes.
and then Boulder is the other one I missed. Cool.
Mhm.
Thanks for looking that up.
Sure, maybe
So-
I'll be right.
The other thing that we had on our agenda that we could just talk about in August, and I could just have you all percolate on it because it's not super time sensitive, is the Our Streets mailer that went out in May. It went to 90,000 addresses. Team worked really hard on it. We've gotten a lot of really good feedback, lots of phone calls and emails from people who are like, we love this, it was so great. A couple people who were like, walking and biking is a fantasy, why are you wasting your time on this? But that was like the minority of
You
people
don't
we
feel that
heard
way.
from for sure. So something for you all to sort of be thinking about is what would a future Our Streets mailer look like? Is there like a really important topic that you feel like we should talk about? Is there like an overarching theme that you think would be really cool? Yeah, you just got something.
Well, we were talking about like education for the different markings.
Mhm.
That could be something that went in there.
Mhm.
This is what the green stripes mean.
Yeah, so I
I don't know if that was in there or not, but
So this is the Our Streets mailer. I have one copy in case. I have more copies at the office that I could bring, but there's that, the first article is what's that on the street?
oh,
There you go.
And I designed it to say fun name, boring name. So it says fun name, bump outs, boring name, curb extension. And so that's like for all the different things. I have the fun name and the boring name, but it kind of just more explains what it is. And I think next time we could maybe pick a few of them to go a little bit more in depth on, like green paint means, like this one says, you know, green paint means people biking have priority and are gonna cross paths with you, but we could do like a deeper dive. Like, what does that mean for you as a driver?
Do you know what the frequency is of these going out, or is that?
Once a year at the most.
Mhm.
Yeah, the goal is to kind of put one out every spring, but they're really expensive.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah,
mailing
alone.
seems like
the
a
mailing
great,
is so expensive, it kind of blew my mind.
seems like a great way to communicate some of the things we need to communicate, though. I thought it was really great, and I heard you were instrumental.
I
That's what I
wrote the whole thing.
Yeah.
And did all those photos. But, I definitely got a lot of help from my team, for sure.
Yeah,
But yeah, it was a big lift, and
Yeah.
we'll see.
I thought it was meaty and light at the same
Yes.
time, you know, so it's navigable.
That was the goal, was to be
Digestible.
approachable, like
Yeah,
an approachable
that's a good-
voice.
Yeah.
Where it was like, and then we had the message from Chief Skinner in there, which was like very intense. So anyway, just be thinking about what future Our Streets mailers might look like, and if you have
Yeah.
any good ideas, just let me know. We can talk about it as we get closer to putting the next one together in ATC. Okay, on to updates and information share. The first thing I have is the July meeting is canceled. So we don't have any staff who can run the July meeting. I'm gonna be out, Shane's gonna be out, Cass is gonna be out, like my team's just out for July, and we normally cancel the July meeting anyway.
But we had talked about, since for everybody who is in town, it might be fun to have a bike, an ATC bike ride that day.
That'd be cool.
The only caveat being I might be out of town. But if there is interest in that, we could put it together. If there like one or two people want to plan and decide, you know, do we want to ride new projects? Do we want to go to someplace that we aren't familiar with? Do we want to just enjoy riding along the river and do some path etiquette, or do we, you know, what do you want out of it? So is there anybody interested in helping to just maybe plan a route or whatever?
I'll be out of town.
Yeah,
Will people be here?
I will. Be interested in doing it. Planning might be a little challenging, but.
Yeah, I'll be out of town up until it, so planning might be tough, but
there's a reason we usually cancel the July meeting.
yeah.
Like, folks are-
August isn't usually any better.
Yeah.
I mean, I could plan the route if I might send out a message to, what kind of a ride do you want? I mean, do you want to see places that you don't know about? Do you want to see projects that have been completed? Do you want to see upcoming projects? Do you want to go to some particular neighborhood? Do you want to hit as many food pubs as possible? Whatever. So I may send that out to you and just see if there's interest. So,
That sounds good.
Charlotte, you had your.
Yeah, so that meeting's canceled, but we have another opportunity to get together, which is a week and a half ago or so. I invite everybody to my backyard for social that's officially part of what we call Cycle of Change, which is kind of the umbrella advocacy group in town. And if y'all don't know about it, we want you to. And if you have not RSVP'd to me, some of you have, but many of you haven't. Please let me know. We're just trying to look for how many chairs we need and that sort of thing. And the idea is to bring your picnic dinner, your portable chair, and there'll be some supplemental goodies for your own picnic dinner. And love to see you. And connect with me and then I'll give you my address.
Yay. Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks for hosting. That's gonna be cool.
My pleasure.
And that's next Monday.
It's next Monday.
just a couple days away.
17th, I believe. Yes.
Okay. And on the 15th is the e-bike expo, which I think a couple people have signed up to volunteer for. But if you ride an e-bike, we're also looking for people to do the show and tell tent, which is where you tell people who are at the e-bike expo about what it's like to ride an e-bike. So if that's interesting to you, there's a sign up form on our social media that you could grab, or you could let me know and you could get signed up. Or you could just do a regular volunteer shift too, if you don't ride an e-bike. So both of those are things, or you could just go and test ride some e-bikes, which is also totally an option if you're in the market. So. Okay, BPAC share.
Yeah, I can
Hi.
do BPAC share out, everyone, Rachel, again from BPAC in Springfield. We had our meeting on Tuesday this week, so we have some summer things coming up. We'll be doing a safe streets audit for this like middle portion of Springfield. There's an elementary school in the Bob Kiefer Center, if you've been out to that area. There's some neighborhoods, I actually live in that neighborhood, so I'm particularly excited to get a look at how poor some of the sidewalk infrastructure is. Like G Street, for example, there's just no sidewalks at all in that little stretch of Springfield. So yes, really good to get eyes on that. We haven't picked a date yet, but it'll probably be in late July. And then our infrastructure subcommittee is going to be advising on some striping projects that are coming up this summer. So we'll try to, where we can, like recommend widening some of those areas that are next to the bike lanes. I learned that adding new bike lanes where there aren't existing ones is complicated. I don't know how it works in Eugene, but in Springfield, yeah, you can't just like do it really quick. So yeah, some stuff coming up with that this summer. There's gonna be some path etiquette campaigns and some festivals in downtown Springfield at Island Park. We're gonna get some bike valet, and Cascade Mobility at those. And then bike share is, from what I see, is going really well in Springfield. I think they're even gonna, if they haven't already, open up a hub at the Centennial Shopping Center.
I just saw a bike there the other day at my gym. I was at my gym and there was a Peace Health bike parked at the gym, and I was like, wow, someone is so healthy.
Yeah, I think that's pretty new. And they were just looking at where people are riding bikes and putting them on hold to ride back. So yeah, I think they put that hub in really recently.
That's so exciting, because that's like right next month.
That is really exciting. Wow.
You guys have a lot going on.
Yeah, good.
You know about it?
Thanks,
Rachel.
Rachel.
All right, leaves us 2 minutes left. Does anybody have anything super pressing to say, or we can adjourn 2 minutes early? Subcommittees have met, they're getting along.
Sweet, wow, and unheard of 2 minutes early.
Yeah.
We're amazing.
Well, we did.
Cutting out.
We did cut 2 times. Awesome, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. It looks like there's t-shirts over there. Are you trying to give those out to anybody who didn't get a t-shirt or?
Yeah, if you didn't get a t-shirt, feel free to peruse the t-shirt pile.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I gave them out at the last meeting, so if you missed the last meeting.
Yeah, that was me.
I think you and Jerry were both gone, so I think there's some large and some extra like.